start by defining and explaining what is meant by abnormal behavior. I'll identify and describe anxiety-related disorders. Also, another outcome is to be able to know and discuss the disorders involving emotion and mood. At the end of this unit, you should be able to define and evaluate the dissociative disorders and also be able to recognize and evaluate schizophrenia. And finally, having completed this unit, you'll be able to identify and describe some personality disorders. So let's start by defining and explaining abnormal behavior. So abnormal behavior is a behavior that is deviant, maladaptive, or personally distressful. So only one of these criteria need to be present for the behavior to be considered abnormal, but they may all be present. And so the first criterion is deviance. So deviant behavior is a form of behavior that does not conform to accepted social standards. Okay, so that defines deviance. So it deviates from the accepted social standards, it deviates from the norms of what society deems to be acceptable. So what behaviors are deemed deviant varies according to the culture in which the person may be presenting these behaviors. Then we have maladaptive. So maladaptive behavior is behavior that interferes with a person's ability to function effectively in society. So there's functional impairment that is the main feature of maladaptive behavior. The person is unable to function and function in an important domain of their life. It might be social domain, it might be a vocational domain, it might be in a domain where they're unable to fulfill their duties. There might be someone who is a parent or a primary caregiver. So if the person is unable to fulfill their parental duties because of some psychological disorder, then they're unable to function. They're unable to fulfill their functions in that important domain of their life, which is parenthood. Or if they're a primary caregiver, if they're giving care to an elderly individual or to someone who has a disability or someone who is in need of care, and they're the primary caregiver, for instance, someone, a spouse with dementia, and the person has a psychological disorder that involves functional impairment, that is, the behavior becomes maladaptive, meaning it interferes with a person's ability to function effectively. And then we have personal distress. So this involves the individual who feels troubling emotions for a prolonged period of time as a result of the disorder. Okay? So the person is distraught, is distraught over their condition. They're experiencing distressing emotions that are overwhelming. They're occupying an important part of the person's experience. Okay, so then we have, what are the theoretical approaches to psychological disorders? So the first one is the biological approach, which describes the medical model. So the biological approach is rooted into the medical model. Okay, so this refers to disorders with biological origins. So the disorder causes, whatever is causing the disorder is organic and internal. So it's rooted into the person's biological systems. So when a disorder is understood under the biological approach, drug therapy is often used to treat the disorder because the disorder is assumed to stem from an imbalance in a biological system. And this imbalance is impacting the neurochemicals in the brain. So drug therapy is often used to treat the disorder. Okay, so again, the medical model is the broader approach the broader framework through which psychological disorders are viewed, and it describes psychological disorders as being medical diseases with a biological origin. So much like other diseases, like a physical disease, like Parkinson's disease, for instance, that's something that it is a medical disease. It has a biological origin. In the same way, psychological disorders are medical diseases that have a biological origin. Physical or biological, then the therapy should aim to regulate that system, regulate the functioning of that system. And that's what drug therapy does. It targets neurotransmitters that have been dysregulated by the condition, whether it be depression or schizophrenia. Okay, so the biological approach describes that psychological disorders are medical diseases with a biological origin. Now let's look at the psychological approach. So this emphasizes the contributions of experiences, thoughts, emotions, and personality features or personality characteristics to explain psychological disorders. So for instance, behavioral psychologists like B.F. Skinner or John Watson would focus on the rewards and punishments in the environment that determine the abnormal behavior. And the social psychologists or the social cognitive psychologists would focus on observational learning, cognitions, beliefs as factors that foster abnormal behavior. Okay, so now we're going to look at the sociocultural approach. So this approach emphasizes the role of larger social contexts like the family, the community, society at large, in which the person lives as being instrumental in the development of a psychological disorder. Okay, so for instance, as I mentioned earlier, a psychological disorder involves behavior that is deviant. So the emphasis on deviance describes that societal constructs are very important in determining what is normal and what is abnormal. Okay, so it suggests that sociocultural factors play an important role in delineating normal versus abnormal. Okay, and so culture matters in very complex ways, and so that it could be culture is so many different things. So this is a model that focuses on how these three factors, biological, psychological, and social cultural, combine to form to form a multitude of combinations that can come to give rise to abnormal behavior. So this is the biopsychosocial approach describes that none of these factors are considered more important than the others, but they're all considered important in determining normal versus abnormal behaviors. So the factors create multitude of combinations, so they interact in a multitude of ways to create expressions of abnormal behavior that are unique to individuals, meaning that two individuals can have the same condition, but the way that the symptoms that they represent vary between the two different individuals. Okay, so the vulnerability stress hypothesis falls under this biopsychosocial model. So it describes that it's also called the diathesis stress model. So it suggests that pre-existing conditions, which are genetic characteristics, so the person's genetic makeup, may predispose them to develop a condition if they are within a certain environment that will lead to the expression of that genetic condition or that genetic makeup. Okay, so the vulnerability combines with stressful life experiences and lead to a psychological disorder. So it's a gene by environment interaction. So the person may have a certain genetic makeup that puts them at risk. It's that genetic makeup, those genetic characteristics that put them at risk of developing a condition if they are experiencing a stressful experience, a stressful life experience. So it's a gene by environment interaction. Okay, so scientists can probe this because they can look at individuals who have a certain genetic a genotype, like a genetic characteristics, and they can compare them to individuals with other genetic characteristics and see how they respond within the same environment. If those two forms of genotype experiencing the same stressful experiences in early life, when they have difficult life experiences, is there one of the genotypes that is most likely associated with the development of a psychological disorder? Is what researchers are looking at. Okay, is one way to probe what genetic makeup is creating a risk factor, is raising the risk that a person will develop a certain psychological condition if they experience a stressful life experience. So now we're going to look at how we classify abnormal behavior. So there is in North America there is a classification system that provides a common basis for communicating the features of a certain clinical disorder. In North America, the standardized manual is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This was first developed in 1952, and now in its current version, it is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual in its 5th edition that was approved in 2013. And so this, as a having a common classification system also allows clinicians to make predictions about the likelihood of a particular disorder's occurrence. So if they have a set of symptoms that define a condition, if a clinician sees some of the symptoms, they might determine that this person may have a likelihood of developing this disorder, may show this disorder later on. Okay. Another important feature is that it determines which individuals may be most susceptible to it. Okay, so it helps to identify, it helps lead to early identification of a clinical condition, because individuals may be showing features that are hallmarks of a condition. And then it also helps to determine what is the best treatment for that condition. Okay, and this is all data-driven or data-informed treatments. So now we're going to look at autism spectrum disorder. So it does this is a term that refers to a range of neurodevelopmental disorders, which might involve impaired social interaction and communication, repetitive behaviors, and restricted interests. Or sometimes the repetitive behaviors are called stereotypies, and there could also be restricted interests, like a very narrow range of interests that the person is showing a tendency towards or interest to. Okay, and so the level of the disability that's associated with autism spectrum disorder ranges from mild to severe. And although it's important to note that whatever the level of disability, it's important to note that early intervention is particularly helpful for children who are diagnosed with a disorder. And this is not a condition that stems from poor parenting styles or from vaccinations, though there was an opinion that was put forth at some time, but that that data had been fabricated. It's not substantiated. It's not scientifically based. So their vaccinations do not cause autism. And instead, there are genetic and brain differences that contribute to the condition. Okay, so as many as 20 genes are involved, and brain differences involve an enlarged or accelerated development of the amygdala. And you remember the amygdala is important for emotional processing. Okay, so in children with autism, the amygdala reaches adult-like size much earlier than those in age-matched children in non